All right, now it's time to take a look at Sports Chat as we do every Monday. And joining me for the discussion is Milton Nakundi of Kurunzi News. Welcome to the discussion. But before we get into that, let's set the stage for this particular discussion with a story where two rugby players, Frank Wanyama and Alex Mahaga, who were found guilty of gang rape, have each been sentenced to 15 years in prison. That being the minimum sentence for such an offence as stipulated by the 2006 Sexual Offences Act. However, the two, through their lawyers, intend to appeal with the hope of being acquitted. KTN's Grace Courier has that particular report for us.
They are not guests at the dock. 24-year-old Frank Wanyama and 23-year-old Alex Mahaga, Friday afternoon being the time they would know their fate.
I was sentenced, the first accused person, on the first count of gang rape to serve 15 years imprisonment. Similarly, the second accused person on the count of gang rape, that's the second count, is equally sentenced to serve 15 years imprisonment.
The two who were last week found guilty of gang raping a female artist, who according to the court's records is referred to as WA, on the night of February 10th last year at Sifa Apartments in Nairobi's Kilimani estate, suddenly did not see that coming, with Chief Magistrate Martha Mutuku reminding the court that her verdict was meant to punish the offenders and discourage them from committing such an act again, while at the same time serving as an example to others, especially the youth. Chief Magistrate Mutuku also said she considered the trauma WA went through and could still be going through.
Quite unfortunate for the boys today. We really expected that they would get an uncustodial sentence, as we had mitigated earlier on.
The two rugby players, Frank Wanyama and Alex Mahaga, were fortunate enough to get the minimum sentence for gang rape, but in 14 days they can appeal.
We're not appealing hoping for a lesser sentence. We're appealing hoping for the boys to be acquitted.
In their submissions, though, the two maintained the sexual contact was consensual. Grace Courier, KTN News.
Now, this is not the first sort of case. If just a quick Google and you'll find out that sports and such cases of sexual assault being faced by many people associated with sports sectors in various countries are not new. We had a case that had 100 girls coming forward to say that they had been sexually assaulted by their coach, or rather, no, this was their doctor. They were athletes who were required to see a doctor, and 100 female athletes during a 3-decade span in the United States actually came out and accused this particular gymnastics doctor, and he had to actually face the law for it. And this is not the only one. We have celebrities such as Neymar and Ronaldo coming face to face with such allegations, and some of these celebrated athletes have actually had to go and settle it out of court. So very delicate matters right here, right, Nyakundi?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it is historically.
Yes.
People have not come out to speak freely about this.
Yeah.
We've started hearing about these cases about 30 years ago.
Especially in this country?
In this country, I think,
yeah,
from experience and interacting with different sports stakeholders, I think it is a common thing.
It is a common thing.
But then the question becomes how the point at which you distinguish between what is women or men playing along and what is actually sexual harassment.
Let's demystify. Is it common for athletes to be accused, or is it common for maybe fans or women around athletes to be taken advantage of? What is common?
Well, I think the face of sexual abuse in sports has been, there is victim. Mostly what we know is that when women have been abused and the perpetrators are often the men. But that is not the only face of sexual abuse in sports. I think what has been rife and over the years, which has not gone reported most of the time, is sexual abuse involving children, where you have coaches taking advantage of underage boys and girls. And this is a very common thing in the US, in Australia, and in the developed world, where kids are exposed to sport at a very tender age, and therefore we've seen cases in the UK, for example, football clubs that have had to take action against coaches who were with them before, and we are hearing cases that happened in the 90s, some in the 80s that are coming out now. Now, that is the bigger picture of sexual abuse in sports. In Korea, for example, where female athletes talk of abuse in the hands of their coaches. But in Kenya, perhaps we are getting the first loudest sounds of these cases. But I think from my own interactions with different sports stakeholders, this is something I think that happens a lot in sports, and unfortunately it has not been reported about, because if you remember a few months ago there was a hue and cry about sexual abuse, lesbianism and sexual harassment within the national football women's team. Imagine where people were talking about it. In rugby you hear cases, but quietly. Those of us who interact with these athletes, with these coaches, with these kids, we get to hear about these voices, but they are very, very silent. And I
would like us to now, before we get deeper into it, I would like us to interrogate why it is so difficult. Let's start off with the children. For example, I gave the example of Larry Nassar, who was abusing kids allegedly for a span of 30 years. And then when they gathered up 100 of them, then they had the loudest voice to actually point to this person as a perpetrator. So could you give us a picture of why it's very delicate for a child, even the parents who are entrusting this child to the coach, to just speak up? Why is it so difficult?
Well, from where I sit, and this is my opinion, because also it is this would be it's a psychological thing, and therefore it might be a better idea to get the professional views from experts in that regard. But from my own opinion is that there are several reasons. One is that you have entrusted, as a parent, for example, you've entrusted your child to this coach, and when these cases come, there are a number of reasons that I think would make the parents or the kids actually themselves not to come out and speak. One is the element of trust. A child, maybe they would not even think that it is wrong. What the coach is doing would be, an infringement on their privacy or amounts to sexual abuse, and therefore they may not speak because they do not know, they do not have that kind of awareness. So obviously the parents and any other people outside that circle may never know. That is one. Two, for the parents, maybe they would get to hear about this, but for fear of victimization against their child, for fear of being ostracized or being stigmatized by, the society, the sporting fraternity. I mean, it could be a case of you have one of the best coaches in child football development, for example.
Probably respected in
the society, in the circles, has been in the business for the longest time, donkey years if you like, and here you are coming out to speak about something that they are doing that is quote-unquote unacceptable. That fear would always be there, and therefore that could be a reason that would make people not to speak. But I think over and above everything, it is a question of fear of stigma, fear of victimization, and not knowing how the world or how the society would react.
Also, could it be that there's a goal of success that we want, so therefore it seems like when you come out with it, then you distract everything from that particular path? Maybe if this is a kid who is a gymnast and they want to be the most successful gymnast or win an Olympic gold medal, I mean, that is the goal, that is the focus. So when you bring all these other elements in, then you feel like perhaps you're pulling away from the great dream that you're supposed to be pursuing.
And that is the fear of victimization, that if a parent would come and speak out, if a child would come and speak out, they would be isolated from, getting the opportunity within the training ground for them to be able to achieve whatever potential they feel they have or fulfill their sporting dream. So that is the delicacy that is the delicate aspect of the whole matter. But I think over the last few years, we are seeing people coming out and talking about it. We are seeing sports formations or different institutions taking decisions and making their voice heard about this, and it's changing a little bit, but I think more needs to be done in terms of dealing with this issue. What has happened with the case of the two rugby players is a good example of how the law can then rein in, but I think it is also an incentive to victims or would-be victims to then come out and speak, knowing that the law and the actors, the different actors within the law are then well covered in terms of whatever reactions happens after they come out and speak.
Now, speaking of this particular case, there's the very delicate issue of celebrity versus the fan, and then that also pretty puts they become some bloodlines, because these are celebrities, and not just in Kenya, all over the world. They have all these women who admire them, or let's say groupies and what have you.
And now men who admire women.
And now we are having men who admire women. And so there might be a bloodline between, I don't even want to say it, because, the victims have a right to actually speak out and say they have been victimized. But at the same time, we're dealing with a group of people who are used to this sort of attention. So how do they even draw that line between this being someone who admires me, this being someone who wants a relationship with me, or this being someone that I can take advantage of because they see me as this person high up on a pedestal? It's pretty complicated in my view.
And that is really, with all due respect to the victims, that is really where the liver juggling comes into place, because there is somebody playing along, and there is somebody feeling, this one, perhaps this looks like something that is going to be serious about it. And midstream, somebody feels they have either change their mind or they get influenced externally by third parties.
Have you heard of this actual story, aside from the one that has made it to the courts? Have you heard of several such stories?
I've had so many such stories.
Really?
Come face to face with some of them, which I would not mention. But again, let me give an example of an athlete somewhere deep in the Rift Valley, where a majority of our runners come from. And you have this coach, you have this agent who stands between them and that big success at a race in Europe. And there are all sorts of approaches that these agents also go through. So it's not just the coaches versus the athletes. There would be a case of an athlete who feels that perhaps the only way for them to get that breakthrough is to entice this agent to perhaps give them an opportunity. So that happens as an agent. As an agent, you do not know how to respond to this. You do not know how to react because, granted, let's not take it away from these people. They are also human. They have feelings. They have emotions, and there's that charm offensive. There's that charm offensive that will sweep you off your feet. It doesn't matter who you are.
So, without you knowing the.
And if people do not then achieve their intended expectation, then they turn around and the card was green, it turns red. And I mean, everybody is going to believe the victim, especially if there is a trail of evidence. If you're talking about a situation where, with WhatsApp chats and all these kind of naughty conversations happening, it is very easy for somebody to find themselves into hot soup. And for the case, I'm not holding brief for them, and this is a conversation that we've had on different platforms as journalists, as stakeholders in sports, and we are asking ourselves, could it be that the gang rape victim had actually given
Well,
reason.
that was the
Given reason for this to happen.
Well,
I have seen it, and you actually do not know, and the sensitivity of the matter makes it even more difficult for us to come out and say, I mean, this is what is happening. This is a matter that is actively in court, and you know, there is the sub judice aspect of all this, because the matter, I mean, the 14 days are not over. They have said they are going to appeal, and therefore we cannot conclusively talk about it or stalk the matter even further. So, I mean, it is very delicate,
we
very
can draw
sensitive.
our examples from foreign cases. For example, Cristiano Ronaldo, the rape allegation he faced in 2018, saying that he said it was the worst he had experienced. And of course, this was something that had allegedly happened 10 years back. So, yeah.
2009, I think that is when that case happened in the US, and Cristiano actually says he wouldn't want to talk so much about it, but from the affidavit that has come out, the information that came out in public is that this actually happened, and as far as he was concerned, there was a consent. But then it turns out that the woman says it never happened.
Different.
So again, as you're Cristiano Ronaldo, you realize that this person is having a soft landing for you and your image and everything, and he agrees to pay almost 45 million shillings to settle that matter out of court.
Yeah, it was
$375,000. That's about 38 million shillings.
Imagine.
And the matter goes quiet. But then, if you're Cristiano Ronaldo, you always have this feeling that
your image is
your image, but then how are you going to deal with any other prospective female that approaches you, or you approach and you feel, yeah, this could be genuine, but then you've been smitten in the past, so you're actually thinking perhaps this is another of such cases, because I am Cristiano Ronaldo, I can afford 40 million. But let's come back here and ask ourselves the questions. Could this be happening in our schools competitions, where kids are looking for opportunity to represent the school, to be scouted in the different tournaments that are happening? Is there cases of soft settlements where we are not talking about 40 million, but it could be 10,000, it could be a job opportunity for a relative, for a sister, for a brother? I mean, that is how big and that is how complex this matter is, that it calls for not just speaking out, but making sure that we create awareness the right way, such that victim-perpetrator narrative is changed to awareness, is changed to responsible sporting conduct. We talk about the code of conduct. I mean, these codes of conduct exist all over the place, but when it comes to adherence and fidelity to that, there are always questions around it. It's just like we know that we have laws around corruption, but it doesn't stop corruption from happening. Again, we've got now to up the ante in terms of how do we make sure that we are not just speaking about this, but there's justice being served. So the state, non-state actors, the parents, the guardians, and the different players have got to put their efforts together to try and see how we can deal with this matter, being as sensitive as it is.
And with the case that we just talked about, the Kenyan one, why wouldn't you expect that the two would actually opt to have a settlement out of court? Because you'd imagine that they, being rugby players, would hope to have a career after this, and I would imagine most of these athletes would settle this, whatever the truth is, out of court, so that they can just go on with their careers. But then this is not happening in this particular case.
Again, too much information flowing left, right, center around this case. And like I said, being an active matter within judicial circles, we may not delve into it. But I want to believe that based on the documents that are public about what may have happened, their strong conviction is that really they're not guilty because maybe this is
so
something
they were hoping that perhaps
according to them there was consent. According to them, this is something that happened in an environment that they believe that the victim may not have reason to come out and accuse them.
Yes.
We hear, I mean, there are different, even new tricks, and many of our viewers out there, we have our fetish. We've had our, I mean, looking at the ages of the people that are involved in this case. Don't be surprised
how
that
old
this
was
is.
she, by the way?
We are not so sure of the age of the victim because the name has not been revealed, but we know the ages of the two players. And at our age, 15 years or so ago, when we were around that age, maybe we've had our fetish, and those are things you hear of people talking about.
But then it
those
didn't
things.
turn out in this particular way.
I'm sure we are out there, and maybe we've had these kinds of things happen, not as it has turned out to be gang rape, but maybe we've had of these things happening, and their consent, and perhaps from where they sit before this matter got this far, I actually think these players thought, yeah, we are safe about it.
I'm literally cringing as we talk about this, just to show how sensitive it is, because you don't want to make it look like the victim. We don't want to victimize the victim, but at the same time, the athletes are in peculiar positions where such kind of attention it comes freely and it comes openly.
I know tricks, and you know, if you've gone for some of these events, especially the rugby events that we've heard of, you know the stories, you know the tales that have come out of that, and you know the obsession, you know what the girls out there, and this is with all due respect. This is with all due respect, and to the girls out there and to the women who go out there. But we've seen the obsession with which they come out, and we've seen how they are ready to melt at the opportunity of the six-packs they see and all that. And therefore, for the players, I've had occasion to hang out with some of these players, and it is a very difficult situation for them to be in because of how fans throw themselves at some of these players and give all manner of offers. So again, it is a very sensitive matter.
To the issue of awareness and being aware of your surroundings. Now, if given the view that you've had, the insight, the access that you've had to both, and having viewed the possible interactions between fans and athletes, and maybe in parties or after parties, how would you then advise a female or a male fan who is getting a bit too cozy? How would you advise them to approach this particular situation? That's maybe in view of inebriation, maybe in view of the kind of mindset that athletes have and what they expect when they're in such situations. How would they approach such an interaction so that they cannot come back or not really come back, or even turn out to be victims when the other party may have seemed to be complicit? This is very sensitive.
It's very sensitive, and I want to borrow the words that have become very famous from Julius Malema when he said, "Mama, give us a sign." So it comes down to two things. One is, if you're an athlete, I mean, it could be athlete to athlete, athlete to a fan, and coach to...
I want to start with fan, because the fan is down here. So the chances, of that...
So I want to bring it down to two things. One, it comes down to responsibility and discretion.
Okay.
I mean, we can talk and talk and talk till the chicken come home to roost. But at the end of the day, it's about your responsibility and discretion as the athlete.
Yes.
You've got to look at the situation, make the right judgment in the heat of the moment, or when this you're confronted with this situation, because at the end of the day, you're human and you've got to make a decision, and that decision is based on the signs that you're given and how you interpret those signs, and at the end of the day, to make sure that you make the right judgment.
But at the
that
same
is
time,
really what it would come down to at the end of the day. But also, we've got to also counsel that if you're a fan out there, if you're vulnerable within the vulnerable community in this regard, then also don't expose yourself. Don't overly express yourself in a manner that then gives the wrong signal or becomes overly suggestive when you actually do not mean that, because then you would be giving the wrong signs, and somebody would be making judgment based on a wrong sign, and you end up being on the wrong side of things.
They might be used to.
Yes.
Now, in the occasion that somebody has not given the wrong signs or mixed signals or whatever we call it, and they have been actually sexually assaulted, they're dealing, it's basically an issue, David versus Goliath type of situation. What is the recourse, basically?
And this is where we are talking about now awareness. This is where we are talking about authorities taking their place in terms of making sure that this is addressed. But I think it is incumbent upon the different sports institutions. We are talking about clubs, sports clubs. We are talking about federations. We are talking about the government. We are talking about the non-state actors to put in measures. I know different organizations, FIFA, for example, are leading the way. There are campaigns like Safe to Compete that are going out there. So once situations like this arise, then we need to have mechanisms, we need to have processes through which these kinds of reports can be processed, so that then you're able to get to the root of it, whether it was a case of the perpetrator reading too much into signals that were given, or the victim having, given too much signs that were misinterpreted, so that all these factors can be processed and put in the right context for people to then not fall victims where they shouldn't, or for perpetrators not to come out as perpetrators when actually they never meant to do anything like that. So that is the sort of balance that we need to have. That is the sort of environment that we need to create at the different levels, and make sure that every stakeholder plays their part in protecting and also making sure that there is justice that is served.
Given that you've said that these are incidences that are quite common, and it's just a question of, I always say when you see it in the news, it's just probably a tip of the iceberg, and there's many other cases that probably have been shrugged off and not seen as newsworthy or what have you, and you have confirmed that this happens quite a bit. On the side of the athlete, Goliath side, how are they supposed to conduct themselves in certain situations so that they are not caught up on the wrong side of things?
Again, it comes down to what I said. Be responsible, make the right judgment. Don't overreact or read too much into situations where fans come all over you and you feel you actually want to take advantage of that. So they need to be sensitive to these issues. They need to be aware that it can happen, and it can lead them into being on the wrong side of the law. But I think above all, like I've said, the different stakeholders need to play their part in sensitizing the different players in this, especially within the parameters, within the confines of the perpetrator-victim kind of situation. Otherwise, then the cases would continue happening unabated, unreported. People would be living with this trauma for many, many years, perhaps for the rest of their lives. Yet these are things that they're supposed to come out and report. So in terms of call to action, my idea would be that government and all other players need now to come out and educate not just the athletes and the coaches, but also the general public in terms of how they can report what exactly constitutes a sexual, abuse against an athlete within the sporting fraternity.
Yes.
What sort of scenarios would then be, the early signs? What are those indicators
Red
that would
flags.
show you that if you're an athlete and this is happening, then perhaps you need to run for your dear life.
Yeah.
If you're a
Like
fan,
in the
if you're a
football
child,
instance,
those are the red alerts that you need to be aware of, because it is happening. People are living with this trauma. We need to set up those structures to ensure that the people are coming out to speak. Those who have been victims, they can come out and be heard.
Yeah.
Those who are accused wrongfully can also come out and speak and say, yes, I have been in this situation and I believe I need help. Because there's also social support that is required, both for the victims, even for the two players. They could come out and they are acquitted, or they serve a shorter sentence. But both the victim and perpetrator need a lot of psychosocial support for them to come over this. Otherwise, it could ruin someone's life forever. It could ruin a career. It could be detrimental. It could, bring down families.
Yes, absolutely.
And the impact is beyond the victim perpetrator, face as we see it.
Absolutely. And of course, when it comes to, we are talking about careers, and we know what these cases could mean to a career. This could actually be the final nail to the coffin that is that person's career. So very sensitive matters right there. We were discussing sexual abuse in the sports arena, and of course the recent cases just indicate that there is a problem that needs to be solved. But that brings us to the end of Sports Chat and effectively Morning Express. I'd like to thank you for staying tuned. I asked you more about what's going on with the census and what you feel about it, and I'm glad that you've been contributing to that conversation. Keep the conversation going online as we wind up the show. But for now, I'm going to hand over to News Center to give you the latest on what's happening in the country a bit